Most people who enter the ocean never think about what is on the floor beneath them. They think about sharks. They think about jellyfish. They think about the things that move fast and look dangerous. They do not think about the thing that looks exactly like a rock and has been waiting there, perfectly still for the last 4 hours. In this video, we cover 5 incidents involving the ocean's most venomous creatures. From a stingray that killed the most famous wildlife presenter in history while his cameraman watched through the lens, to a man who stepped on the world's most venomous fish and decided a bottle of wine would handle it. We begin on September 4th, 2006 at 11 in the morning in chest-deep water off the North Queensland coast. As always, viewer discretion is advised. Steve Irwin was 44 years old and had spent the majority of his life making wildlife television that other people were afraid to make. He had wrestled crocodiles, handled taipans, and put himself in proximity to animals that the rest of the world's wildlife presenters filmed from a vehicle at a safe distance. He was not reckless in the way people have sometimes suggested. He was experienced, skilled, and genuinely understood the animals he worked with at a level that very few people in his field had achieved. He was also, on the morning of September 4th, waiting out bad weather on his research vessel Croc 1, while his crew looked for something to fill the downtime. Justin Lyons had been Irwin's cameraman and closest professional partner for 15 years. The two of them had an agreement that had been in place since they started working together. Whatever happened, Lyons kept filming. If he dies, film it, was how the arrangement had been described by a crew member to another journalist. Steve's position was that he wanted everything documented, that the footage mattered regardless of what happened to him while it was being taken. It was not a morbid agreement. It was the philosophy of a man who had spent 15 years in situations where something might go wrong and had made peace with that well in advance. They were 8 days into filming an underwater documentary called Ocean's Deadliest, when the weather shut down the morning's planned shoot. Irwin decided to snorkel in shallow water near Bat Reef to get footage for a separate project, his daughter Bindy's children's show. He and Lyons went into the water together. Lyons was behind the camera. The short-tailed stingray, also called the bull ray, is the largest stingray found in Australian waters. It can reach 14 feet in width and weigh over 770 pounds. Its tail carries a serrated bony spine, typically 8 to 12 inches long, covered in a mucus sheath that contains venom capable of causing severe pain, localized tissue death, and cardiovascular effects. The spine is not used to hunt. It is a defensive weapon deployed when the animal feels threatened or cornered. Under normal circumstances, a stingray encountered in open water simply swims away. The ray Irwin and Lyons found in chest-deep water that morning was not in open water. It was near the reef edge, and as Irwin swam up and over the top of its body, it was cornered between him and the reef behind it. It propped on its front and started stabbing wildly with its tail, Lyons told Australia's Studio 10 in 2014. Hundreds of strikes in a matter of seconds. The barb entered Irwin's chest, driving through the thoracic wall and penetrating his heart. The wound it left was 2 inches wide. Lyons initially did not register the severity of what had happened. The water around the ray was turbulent from the motion, and Lyons was locked on Steve's position through the viewfinder. Then Irwin stood upright in the chest-deep water. He pulled the barb out of his chest. This was the decision that made survival impossible. The serrated spine on entry had created a channel to the heart that the barb itself was partially sealing. Removing it opened the wound fully. John Stainton, Irwin's producer and manager, who watched the footage once and stated he would never watch it again, described what the tape showed. It shows that Steve came over the top of the ray and the tail came up and spiked him here in the chest, and he pulled it out, and the next minute he's gone. Lyons got Irwin onto the inflatable dinghy. The rest of the crew pulled them both aboard Croc 1. There was blood across the bottom of the boat. Lyons began CPR. Other crew members held their hands over the wound. Someone told Steve to think about his kids, to hang on. He looked up at Lyons and said, in the calm and specific way that people sometimes speak in the seconds before they lose consciousness for the last time, "I'm dying." Those were his final words. He lost consciousness on the boat, and was pronounced dead at 12:53 p.m. before reaching shore. The footage was seized by Queensland police and used in the coroner's inquiry. It was subsequently returned to Discovery Communications, who stated it would never be broadcast or released publicly. Terry Irwin later said she destroyed her copy without watching it. Whether the police copy still exists and in whose custody it remains has never been formally confirmed. John Stainton, watching the footage in the hours after his friend's death. It's a very hard thing to watch because you're actually witnessing somebody die. It's terrible. Steve Irwin's death was only the 17th recorded stingray fatality in Australian history. It remains, to the knowledge of most marine biologists who study the species, the only time a short-tailed stingray has ever driven its barb into a human heart. Nathaniel Peterson, better known on YouTube as Coyote Peterson, built a following of more than 20 million subscribers by doing something that sounds straightforward when you describe it and genuinely terrible when you watch it, allowing venomous insects and animals to sting or bite him on camera to show his audience what the experience is actually like. He had already been stung by a bullet ant, a tarantula, hawk, wasp, an executioner wasp, and a velvet ant before he reached the stonefish. The stonefish is the most venomous fish on Earth. It does not move fast. It does not pursue prey. It sits on the floor of shallow tropical reef environments and waits, using a camouflage so convincing that researchers who study the species describe regularly stepping on them in the field without seeing them first. Its 13 dorsal spines are concealed beneath a textured surface that replicates the appearance of encrusted rock or coral. When pressure is applied to the spine, from a foot, a hand, or anything else, venom is pushed through grooves in the spine into the wound at the point of contact. The venom causes immediate catastrophic pain described by multiple victims as unlike anything else in human experience, followed by swelling, tissue death at the contact site, nausea, paralysis, cardiovascular instability, and, in severe untreated cases, death. There is an anti-venom. It is effective. It needs to be administered. Peterson's stonefish video was filmed in a controlled setting with medical personnel present. He knew what he was doing. He had done this before with other species, and the reaction he had on camera to the stonefish sting is one of the most medically accurate and viscerally honest accounts of what this particular venom does to a human being in the minutes immediately after contact. He describes on camera the pain beginning almost before he finishes the sentence he was speaking. He describes it moving up his arm. He is visibly in severe distress within the first 60 seconds. The scale of the reaction is significant even for someone who has deliberately experienced some of the worst venoms in the insect world and knows what he is measuring this against. He describes the stonefish as the worst thing he has ever felt, and he has a substantial personal reference library for what that comparison means. He received medical treatment. He recovered without lasting injury. He described the experience afterward as the closest thing to what he imagined serious acute illness must feel like. Not just pain, but a full system disruption, his body responding to a toxic event across every available channel simultaneously. The video is publicly available on the Brave Wilderness YouTube channel. Adam Clancy is an Australian photographer. In April 2022, he stepped on a stonefish. What happened next tells you something important about the gap between understanding what a stonefish sting can do and actually believing it applies to you. Clancy was in the water near the Australian coast when he felt the stonefish beneath his foot. He knew what had happened immediately. He also made a series of decisions that medical professionals who treat stonefish stings would describe as exactly what you should not do. He declined to go to a hospital. He refused painkillers. He had a friend bring him a bottle of wine and some whiskey instead. The stonefish venom was doing what stonefish venom does. The pain in his foot was already severe and escalating. The swelling had begun. The tissue at the contact site was beginning to break down. None of this changed his position on the hospital. The established first aid for a stonefish sting is immersion in water as hot as the victim can tolerate. Heat denatures the proteins in the venom, reducing the active damage, followed by immediate medical evaluation and, in serious cases, administration of the antivenom. The reasoning behind the hot water is well documented. and the treatment has been shown to reduce the severity of the outcome if applied quickly. Adam Clancy's response to being stung by the most venomous fish on Earth was to drink through it. He survived. He documented the experience online, and the story was picked up by Newsweek and other outlets, primarily because of the specific nature of the decisions he made rather than the sting itself. In interviews afterward, he described the pain as extraordinary and made clear he was aware he had handled it badly. He recovered. The reason his case appears in any discussion of stonefish encounters is not because of what happened to him, it is because of what he chose not to do. And because the fact that he survived despite those choices sits alongside cases where people who were stung made better decisions and died anyway because of factors that had nothing to do with their response. It was August 5th, 2010. A dive instructor working in the waters off Onna Village on the western coast of Okinawa, Japan, was on a dive when he was stung by a stonefish. The details of the exact circumstances, how close to the reef he was, what direction he was moving, whether the contact was with a foot or a hand, were not fully documented in the public reporting. What the prefectural health department confirmed was the outcome. He was pronounced dead at 10:35 in the morning at a hospital in Nago. It was the first stonefish fatality on Okinawa since 1983, when a 31-year-old man died on a beach in Yomitan after handling a stonefish he had caught while fishing. In the 27 years between those two deaths, the stonefish population in the shallow waters around Okinawa had not changed significantly. The number of people entering those waters had. Dive tourism, snorkeling, and recreational water activities had expanded the contact surface between humans and the animals living at the bottom of the reefs dramatically. The prefectural pharmaceutical department issued guidance after the 2010 death, recommending that all beachgoers and snorkelers wear thick-soled footwear in reef areas and that divers be aware of the specific risk the stonefish presents compared to other marine life. The standard advisory, which had been in place since the 1983 death and which nobody had needed for 27 years in the interval, was reissued and translated into additional languages for the benefit of the tourist population that now made up a significant proportion of the people in the water. The dive instructor who died on August 5th was experienced. He was working. He was in the water he knew. The stonefish was in the same water and it did not care about any of those things. The lionfish is not native to the Atlantic Ocean. It arrived from the Indo-Pacific. The prevailing theory is through the aquarium trade, released by owners who no longer wanted them, and began spreading through the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico in the 1980s. By the 2010s, it had established itself as one of the most damaging invasive species in the Atlantic reef system, consuming native reef fish at a rate that local predators were not equipped to manage, because those predators had no evolutionary experience of the species and did not recognize it as prey. The Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary introduced lionfish removal programs to address this. Trained volunteer divers entered the reef with pole spears and vacuum suction tubes to remove lionfish manually. It was effective work. It was also, for the divers doing it, work in close proximity to a species whose dorsal, pelvic, and anal spines all carry venom and which does not move away when approached. A diver in the Florida Keys removal program, working a reef section near Molasses Reef in the summer of 2019, was in the process of securing a large specimen in a containment tube when the fish twisted. One of the 18 venomous dorsal spines drove through the index finger of his right hand, puncturing to the bone. The lionfish venom is not in the same category as the stonefish. It is not usually fatal. What it does produce, immediately, without delay, is pain that multiple sting victims have described as disproportionate to any prior experience with cuts, burns, or other injuries. The finger swelled within 2 minutes. His hand was non-functional within 5. By the time he surfaced and was back on the dive boat, his arm up to the elbow was exhibiting the characteristic swelling and blanching that signifies a significant envenomation. The hot water treatment applied on the boat reduced the severity. He was taken to the nearest emergency department. He received treatment. He recovered with no lasting damage to the finger. He returned to the removal program. He also said afterward, in the way that people say things that are true, but that don't stop them from doing the same thing again, that nothing in his previous experience with marine life had prepared him for the specific quality of what a lionfish spine felt like going through his finger. He described it as the hand understanding the information: spike, venom, tissue damage, faster than the brain could process the event. Not pain arriving after the impact, pain being the impact. The Molasses Reef section of the Florida Keys Sanctuary, where he was working, had been mapped as one of the highest density lionfish concentrations in the program's monitoring zone. He had been in the water there a dozen times before. He had never been stung.